Peace and blessings. My name is Carlos Walker, and this is Forward Progress. And today I got Mr. Daniel. Is it Collins?
Yeah, Collins.
Daniel Collins. How you doing, bro?
Doing well, and you?
Man, I'm doing perfect.
Good.
So, if you will, share a little bit about who you are and what you do.
My name is Danny Collins, as he said. I do a lot of criminal justice reform activism. I do a lot of educational, informative work. I went from professional baseball to being homeless to 10 years in prison. Um, I also went from, extreme right wing politics and Christian nationalism to transforming into, you know, someone that I feel like is an independent thinker now. So I think I was caught up in a lot of the propaganda and the lies, and that's what I was exposed to as a child, growing up in my community. So, um, yeah, so I take all that information and everything I learned, and I try to take it back to my community to educate, more people, especially people who look like me, who were raised like me, and taught to believe the way that I believe.
All right. Appreciate you for your work too.
Thank
So,
you.
here we go. So, on Forward Progress, what I do, I take people as far back as you would like, meaning
Hmm.
your childhood, and then I guide them up until the time that you got in trouble. We talk a little bit about prison life and what you learned in there, and
Hmm.
what you may have done in there. And then we
Yeah,
talk about all the great things that you're doing now.
got
So,
it.
if you want to, go back as far as early as you want to.
Okay. Yeah, I was raised in Fort Pierce, Florida, which is a small town on the southeast coast of Florida. We're probably about 30 minutes of Palm Beach, the Mar-a-Lago area. And I at one when I was one, my biological mother left. So I was raised by my dad and my stepmom, but I was raised to believe that my stepmom was my biological mother. And nobody ever really communicated that in my house. In my house, we didn't really talk about things. It was just, I guess it was supposed to be kind of understood. And especially when it came to like feelings or emotions and stuff like that, where there was never any "I love yous" in the house. But all my basic needs were met. We weren't rich by any means at all. My dad was in law school when he had me, and he dropped out of law school because my mom had left, my biological mother, and he got a job and did what he could to raise me. When I was like 6 or 7, I don't even know how old I was. I was young, but I was playing basketball in front of my house, and these two girls came riding by on a bicycle. One girl pointed to the other girl and said, "Hey, Daniel, that's your sister." And they kept riding, and I was like, "My sister? Like, I don't have, I have one baby sister inside that was with my dad and my stepmom, who I thought to be my biological mother, my mother." So I ran inside and I didn't say anything to anybody in the house, but obviously I was confused. Then a little bit of time passed. Walking to school because school was in our community, and this same girl comes up to me and was like, "Daniel, you don't know me, but my name's Rebecca, and I'm your sister." And I freaked out and I started running, and I didn't say anything again to anybody. But now I started looking for ways to find out if I had a sister. Like, why is this person coming up to me and saying that she's my sister? And I was a child, I was inquisitive. I had questions, but I didn't really know how to communicate any of those or articulate my thoughts. And so then I get a birth certificate because I'm playing baseball. This is now a couple more years had passed, and I'm 9, and I have to take a birth certificate to the little league field to prove my age. And when I read the birth certificate, the mom on my birth certificate's name didn't match up with the lady I was calling them. So this was the first time I think I, connected the dots. But even then, I don't think I understood the gravity of what that meant. But also back then on birth certificates, they had siblings' names on it, which I've never seen a birth certificate these days that have that. But back
Mhm.
then, I literally had a sibling name on it, and not only did it have her name on it, but it had her date of birth, and and it said, sibling, sister, Rebecca Hunter, born in November of 1979. And, I'll never forget it. But I was like, so this same girl that came up to me and said she was my sister. Rebecca really obviously was my sister according to this birth certificate. Well, I gave that birth certificate to my little league coach, and I was crying, but like I didn't really understand like exactly what it was that I was feeling. And he was like, what's wrong with you, son? Like my little league coach was like like a second dad. And he was like, what's wrong with you, son? And I told him, I was like, one day I'm going to play professional baseball, and specifically for the Atlanta Braves, so maybe my mom would want me. And I think he knew, but really didn't understand what I was saying. But I was like kind of throwing a temper tantrum and crying at the same time. And still, nobody in my household communicated this.
Mm.
And I started to act out a lot. I started getting in trouble as a young kid, just mischievous things like, but I was a really good student and I was really good at baseball, and I did well in both of those. And a bunch of time had passed through high school. I'm getting in trouble. Nobody's ever communicated anything to me, but my parents were kind of abusive. They were definitely verbally, emotionally, and even physically abusive. Like the hitting, the spankings, but the spankings were never just like on your rear end. The spankings were, sometimes hit my back, sometimes hit my face, belts every which way, especially because I would squirm and I would fight. And we were kind of in that generation where it was like, okay, this is normal. Like that's what parents do. They beat their kids when they act up. And so, I was definitely, hit quite a bit. And then there was a time when I was about 15, and I had talked back to my mom, who I'd called my mom my whole life, and she slapped me across the face. And when she slapped me across the face, I had a sandwich in my hand. I kicked her, and I was like, "You can't punish me. You're not my real mom." And
Mm.
I took off running. But this was the first time, in my life that we had ever acknowledged that she wasn't my mom, like, or that she wasn't my biological mother. She was my mother because she raised me, but like we never had a close relationship. We never said I love you. We never hugged. We never any of that. Like it was, But she made sure that there was food on the table. Needs were met and stuff like that. So that happened. My dad chased after me. I took the sandwich and I threw it at him, and then eventually he tackled me to the ground and started whooping my butt. And but again, we really didn't talk about it after that. But then my mom did want us to go to therapy, and and I had never been to therapy at this age. I'm young. I'm 15, 16, 17 in this time frame when this is happening. And we go to therapy, and obviously the conversation of my mom comes up, and my dad starts breaking down crying, and I'd never seen my dad cry before.
Mm.
And it was super hard for me, you know what I mean? Because like he was like my hero. He raised me. He could do no wrong in my eyes. Um, And when he started breaking down crying, this therapy session like lasted, the hour or whatever it was. And I said, I'm never going back, and I didn't. I didn't go back again after that, but I was still angry and very bitter. And, I didn't know how to process these emotions. I didn't know how to communicate anything. And my dad tried, but he wasn't very good at communicating either. He was a man of few words. So like, nobody knew like how to handle me. They just thought maybe I would grow out of this, it would go away. And the fact that I was a straight A student and doing well in baseball, that's what my dad kept saying. But the fight between my dad and my stepmom was always about how they should raise me. So my dad was like, as long as he's playing baseball, making straight A's, I'm going to do whatever I can to help support him financially. Even though we didn't have a lot of money, they were like, I'll pay for his car, his insurance, his gas, and a little bit of spending money. you know, this is going to end up paying for his college and maybe even beyond. But my mom, was like, you're delusional. You're living in la la land. Like, you need to get a grip on reality. And one in a million make it. He needs to quit playing baseball. He needs to get a job and learn responsibility, right? He needs to
Mm.
learn how to grow into an adult. So that was the constant battle in my house. And there was one other thing that had happened that really, like, I think was like the the final, straw in the trauma for me was like, I was dating this girl, and she lived on the other side of town. And my parents were so strict that like when I was dating someone, I had to write down the name, the the parents'
Address.
name, the address, the phone number. So I did all this. I wrote down her name, I wrote down her dad's name, I wrote down the address and the phone number. And my dad read it and he was like, "Is her dad a cop?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "You're not going over there." And I was like, "What do you mean I'm not going over there?" And it was, he said, "It has to do with your biological mother." First time ever that he, like outside of, me fighting with her, but the first time he had ever brought it up. And he told me that I wasn't going. So of course, me being the rebellious kid I went anyways. And when I got over there, I pulled up and I told her like what had transpired. And come to find out, it's crazy, you know. Come to find out, she was like a second or third cousin. Like we had the same last name, or not. We didn't have the same last name, but my biological mother and her had the same last name. But I never connected the dots. Like my biological mother's name was Jerry Yolanda Fields, and her last name was Fields as well. So, and I guess my dad didn't really know what the correlation between them was or what the relationship was, but my dad just kind of felt like for whatever reason that he was the reason behind why my mom had left him,
Mm.
right? So, but at this point, I had never met my mom, I never had any conversations with her or anything. So that had kind of happened, and her and I obviously stopped talking then. I was still young, still a virgin at this time, so I didn't even, good thing, I'd been like sleeping with my cousin. I'd have been some real like white people in the wood shit. but um so I of course I'm mad, I'm resentful against my parents and the whole situation. I'm just mad at the whole situation, and I continue to act out, but I'm doing so well in school in baseball that I end up getting a scholarship to go to the local junior college. So I graduated high school with like a 4.1 GPA. I get a scholarship to play baseball at the local junior college. My After my freshman year, and the way baseball works is that you're draft eligible every year only if you go to a junior college. So if
Mm.
you go to a 4-year school in baseball, unlike like basketball where you can declare draft eligibility after your freshman year, baseball you can't. You have to wait till you finish your junior year if you go to a 4-year school. But if you go to a 2-year school, when they had 2-year schools, because I think they kind of turned into state colleges now, but you go to a 2-year school, then you can be draft eligible every year, and you don't have to declare eligibility in baseball. They just draft you. So after my freshman year in college, I got drafted
Mm.
late. I got drafted by the Atlanta Braves, and I
Okay.
wasn't expecting to get drafted. I had no intentions of it. I was partying a lot in college. Like I was not really living up to my potential, and so I get drafted by the Atlanta Braves, but basically then there was 50 rounds. They drafted me like in the 45th round, and they had no intentions of signing me that year. But what they did is they have what's called a draft and follow, and basically what you do is you sign your rights to that team to where like they own the rights to you. You go back to school for a year. If they like what they see, then they can offer you more money. If not, they have like a week grace period before the draft. And if they don't like what they see or you can't come to a negotiation of a deal, then they'll let you go. They release your rights and you go back into the draft. And so Braves were the team that I always wanted to play for as a kid. I told my little league coach one day I'm going to grow up and play professional baseball for the Atlanta Braves. And lo and behold, I get drafted by them. And albeit it was in the 45th round. But so then the next year I go back to school and I have a really good season, like the best season I ever had playing baseball. To where most scouts were saying that if I went back in the draft, I'd go anywhere from like the second to the sixth round at this point. And so the Braves, I go back to school that year, do really well. Now the Braves are at every game, watching every game. I threw the only no hitter in our college history. Pitched us all the way into pitched first game of state, won that game. Like it was just a really dominant year for me.
Yeah, hell
And
of a year.
yeah, it was a hell of a year. And then so after that, they ended up making me an offer. And the way it works with baseball too is that you can't really work with an agent. It's what's called like a financial advisor. Once you sign an agent, you lose your amateur status. Now
Mm.
you're officially a professional. So like you can't sign with an agent. So the team doesn't work directly with the agent, they work with the advisor, but they really work through you. And then you got to take the information back to the advisor. They tell you deal or no deal, and then you take it back to the team.
Give me
Well, the
one.
problem with that is kids are young and naive. I was 19 years old at the time. I didn't really know how to navigate this. So the Braves, when they're calling me, they're telling me, "Oh, you got to take this offer, or that's it." Like, and this is going to be your last chance. If you don't take it, then you're not going to be able to play. And they kind of put that fear in you, right? So the
Give me
first
one
offer,
second.
yeah,
1 second.
yeah, and it kind of worked. So the first offer they made was like $80,000 plus $80,000, signing bonus. And I was like, no. I went to the agent. He said, no, we can get you more. So we went back and forth. We had to go back and forth. We finally landed on a six-figure contract with $40,000 also for school for my remaining 2 years. That way, if baseball didn't work out, they had to pay for my final 2 years of college as well. And I signed for that, and even then, my agent wasn't happy because he felt like I could have got more. But they scared me into like making a deal, and honestly, maybe I should have went back to college at this point, anyways. I just wasn't ready mentally and emotionally. So I get the contract, I get the money. I'm 19. I'll never forget when I signed that contract. My dad and my mom were there. They bring the big check to you. They come to the house. And my dad looked at my mom and said, "I told you so." So it was kind of like a big moment. But for me, I still wasn't, I was sick, like I had a lot of mental health issues and stuff that I didn't know how to process. And, I was drinking a little bit in college. I had dabbled into a little bit of drugs, cocaine and stuff like that, but I didn't really have a means to an end, like, so I didn't really have the money to afford it. It didn't get crazy. But then when I got this check, I was, obviously everybody comes out of the woodwork with friends and going out to bars and clubs and just living that lifestyle of chasing women, drinking, partying, and all that stuff. And I started doing it a lot more frequently. The drinking, the
More money,
cocaine
more
with the money.
problems. That's what
Yeah.
Biggie said.
Yeah, and it got crazy. So like I started doing a lot of that, to the point where it started to spiral out of control. And there's people in my life, they try to intervene, and they didn't. I got caught up with people that were, we were hustling, selling drugs, as well as partying, doing drugs. I had the money to buy quantity and weight to where we thought we could be like big dogs and flip it, and then still like all this while trying to live a life of playing baseball too. So the whole Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, like, because I grew up in poverty. I grew up in um in a town to where like like that's kind of what we knew, like the streets. It just got exacerbated. Like I didn't have to live that lifestyle, but I kind of grew up around it and in it, you know what I mean? Because my family, we grew up in poverty. We worked paycheck to paycheck, so it was always going on around me, and I was always and I was intuitive. I would see. And but so I got caught up in that lifestyle while I'm playing baseball for the Braves. And eventually I started getting arrested for petty stuff, public intoxication, disorderly intoxication. I had actually got into um, a bar fight, and I got arrested while in spring training with the Braves, and they still tried to sweep it under the rug and help me, like, because everybody wanted to protect my baseball career. So when I started getting arrested, even the judges, everybody was like, he's a straight A student. He's a great baseball player. He just signed professionally. We're going to basically slap him on the wrist and make this go away. This was probably like some of my biggest experiences with privilege in the criminal justice system before even recognizing what privilege was, And so, but that did me a lot of harm because I wasn't getting better. It was my addiction and my mental health was getting progressively worse. And there was no intervention in terms of rehabilitation. So every time I got arrested, they just slapped me on my wrist and make it go away until they could no longer do that. So finally what had happened is I got so addicted to drugs, I ended up losing the baseball career, losing everything. Right. And I had spent pretty much all my money to where I ended up like homeless in the streets, like to that level. Like I was sleeping on friends' couches. I was in different places. Even sometimes I'd end up outside, Um, for a night or two, and then somebody would let me in their house, and it got really bad. And I got to a dark place to where I was like, you know what, I don't want to live anymore. I can't. Logically, I knew better. Like logically, reasoning, I knew that the decisions I was making wasn't good for me. It wasn't healthy. But for whatever reason, I couldn't stop. I just felt trapped in this vicious cycle, and I couldn't get out of it. So my solution was just in my life. So one night I was, you know, living with a friend at this time, couch surfing the way I'd been, and he was also selling drugs. And he went out that night. I went over to his house and robbed him out of his safe.
Mm.
Well, when I did, when I did it, I knocked on the door, and his girlfriend's sister answered the door, and I said, "Hey, do you mind if I come in? I need to get some of my stuff." Like I had a bunch, all my clothes, everything was there, right? And she said, "Yeah, no problem." So I came in, I grabbed a bunch of my clothes, but then I went in his safe. I took the drugs, I took the jewelry and shit like that, and I put it in my shoe, and I walked out. But I didn't take everything. So I walk out and I leave, and I'm driving down the road, and I'm like, man, I should have got everything, right? Like, if what am I doing? Like, so I circle back. I go back. This time when I go back to the house, I knock on the door again. She answers the door, but it's not with the same like welcoming attitude. But she didn't say I couldn't come in. She didn't say I could come in. She just kind of, and she was on the phone, and I figured she was probably on the phone with him, but she had a look on her face, right? It was kind of fearful. And I just took it upon myself. I walk right past her into the house. I grab everything and I leave. Well, as I'm leaving now, here he comes flying around the corner. And,
Mm.
but at this time I didn't care. Like I was ready for whatever, like you do what you're going to do. Right. And, so I go to get in my truck, and, he doesn't really do anything. His girlfriend was making a lot of noise. She was screaming and yelling. She went to like act like she was going to jump on my truck, and I was like, "I'll flip you off of here." Nothing was going to stop me in this moment. So I pull off to leave, and she calls the cops. Well, when she calls the cops, I'm driving the back way out of the neighborhood, and it's late at night. And so my idea was that I was going to get on 95 and head south and get out of town. Well, when I get to the intersection of a light, I see a cop car coming. And it's just me and him on the road. Like, and I was going to turn right there, and I seen him going left there. So I was like, I'm going to go straight. Well, when I went straight through the intersection, he stopped in the middle of the intersection. So I knew to turn. So I knew at that moment, okay, he's coming for me. And I had a decision to make. And in that moment, I made up my mind that like I wasn't stopping. Like they're gonna have to kill me, whatever it takes. Like I saw the lights. I was like, I'm gone. So I took off, and we ended up down a whole bunch of back roads. We're in a high speed chase now. Now they're calling for backup. All these different cars are on me. I'm going down all these different back roads. I got drugs on me. I've got the stolen merchandise on me. I've got, um, you know, everything I own. Half of everything I own in the truck. The other half is at his house. And um, I'm running, and I get to a dead end road. And when I get to a dead end road, there's obviously no outlet. They get out, guns are drawn on me. I look in my mirror, and I'm like, I'm still not stopping, right? So I dropped the truck, and I was in a work truck at this time too. The company I was working for was out of Jacksonville, Florida, which is like 3 hours north of where I was living. And I'm in a work truck. I drop it into first gear. It's a Nissan Frontier. It's got an extended cab on it. It's wrapped in the company logo. The entire truck is wrapped in the company logo. Like obviously, it's going to stick out. And I turn around, and now I'm like in the cops' direction. Like they all got their guns drawn on me. But rather than them shooting at me, they move out of the way. Like,
Mm.
and for whatever reason, I didn't hit them. Like I didn't hit anybody. Nobody got hurt, and they didn't shoot me. And again, another time that like privilege showed up in my life. That like literally my truck is faced in their direction. They charged me. I ended up getting charged when I got arrested for aggravated assault on an officer. They said that they were in fear of their life. That my truck became a missile. But I drive right past them. No shots fired, uh, and keep going. So I'm going down all these back roads, but every time I hit the brakes, they're on me. So I start fumbling around for the fuse box because I want to get the brake lights to go out. And that was a dumb idea again, because like I don't even know what fuse. Like I'm just,
Pulling fuses.
yeah, I'm out of my mind. Like adrenaline's running. I've been up on drugs. I hadn't really slept. Like I don't want to live at this point. So I go to fumble for the fuse box. Well, when I look up, the road ends. There's signs, big mound of dirt with signs saying you either got to go left or right. There's no going straight. Well, at the last minute, I tried to yank the wheel, and I hit the mound of dirt. I take out the signs, and I go flying in the air. So I brace myself. Well, when I hit water, and the truck. I flipped into a canal, and the
Mm.
truck starts to sink at this time. My head hit the windshield. Um, I'm panicking, right? All the windows are up. I can't, I'm panicking. All that you want to die, now self-preservation kicks in. Like I'm doing everything I can to try to live, right? To get out of this truck. Truck starts sinking. And I mean, it filled up with water quick. Water comes rushing into the
Mm.
cabin. I can't get the windows down. I can't get the door open. Well, there's an extended cab on the truck that has like a hatch, but there's a camper on the back. So I don't know how I slid through it, and I've got this huge scar on my hand here that I think I punched the glass. But anyway, so I'm going through the hatch, but in my head, I'm trying to just get air, right? So I swallowed a bunch of water. I was, panicking. I go to swim up. Well, my head hits the camper of the truck, and I still can't get out, right? But when a vehicle sinks, it starts to like buoy out a little bit, like with the distribution of the water, I guess, as it's filling up. But at the very back end of the truck, there was still like, a good pocket of air that hadn't gone underwater yet.
Mm-hmm.
So in the very back corner of the truck, I go up to that spot and I get a little bit of air. And I went back down to try to get the hatch open on the camper. Well, I'm hitting the hatch, hitting the hatch, hitting the hatch. Finally, it pops open. Well, the truck's going down at the same time I'm coming out, like completely underwater. And it was like a black hole. It was like a vacuum, like sucking me down. It ripped my shorts off. It ripped my shoes off. Um, and I'm going to swim up. And it literally felt like somebody was like pulling me out of the vehicle. And then at the same time, while somebody's pulling me down underneath, right? And so when I get out of the vehicle and I get into the water, I'm gasping for air. Obviously I'm trying to breathe. But in my head, I'm still running from the police. The truck
Mm.
went completely underwater, sank to the bottom of the canal. But I'm swimming in this canal now, and it's the middle of the night. It's a big canal, alligator infested water, in Florida. Um, this canal feeds into the river. So it's a big canal. And the current was so strong that I was like, oh, I give up, right? And I start swimming towards what I see to be like the cops, the Q beams that shine the light, the spotlights with the water.
Mm-hmm.
I see cop lights on each side of the canal bank. So I'm following that light up to the canal bank, and I get up to the canal bank. I'm out of breath, like just whooped, right? And I climb up on the canal bank, and next thing you know, I black out, like I just fall out. Well, I wake up. When I wake up, it's the next day, and I'm still laying in the grass on the side of the canal bank. Nobody's in sight, right? The grass is super high around me, like nobody's in sight. I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. I'm covered in blood, all in my face, my chest, my hands, legs, everything was sliced open. I'm just in a t-shirt and boxer briefs because it ripped my shorts and my shoes off. And I'm laying there covered in blood, and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. Well, a little bit of time passed. I don't even know how long passed. Next thing you know, you see ambulance and cop cars coming down the road, right? Well, they get out of their vehicles, and it's a dirt road. They get out of their vehicles, and they're looking into the canal bank or into the canal, and they don't even see me. So I'm screaming, and finally they see me, and they come over to me, and I'm like, got to get me to the hospital. You mofos, pulled me out of this truck. You left me here for dead. You chased me into this canal. You left me here for dead. Somebody needs to get me to the hospital. And they're like, we didn't pull you out of that truck, and we didn't, we had no idea that you were in the canal. Like we had, and I was like, well, if that's the case, what brought you back to this spot? And they were like, well, we got a call from a lady that, there's a white male covered in blood in his underwear and a t-shirt screaming, bloody murder. And so they said that they thought that I pulled a Houdini and disappeared. But I was like, where else could I have gone? You know, it was literally at like the end of the road into the canal, right? Like where the truck just disappeared. So, um, needless to say, they ended up, you know, putting me on a stretcher. They took me to the hospital, and I wasn't under arrest yet, but they kept asking me who was driving. And, you know, I was like, I was driving. Who else would be driving? And I was so green to the system at the time that I didn't realize I was incriminating myself because they didn't get me in the vehicle. The vehicle's at the bottom of the canal. I'm on the side of the canal bank the next day. Anybody could have been driving. Where's the
Mm-hmm.
driver? He got away. You know, I don't know who was it. I don't know. One of somebody I would buy drugs from. Like it's been anything, right? But um, I kept telling them I was driving, and that was, you know, enough. That was the confession that they needed to get me with the high speed chase, aggravated assault on an officer, and they handcuffed me to the bed. And but I stayed in the hospital for a few days at this point. But they charged me with possession of cocaine, aggravated fleeing and eluding, aggravated assault on an officer. Charged me with 2 burglary of occupied dwellings because I went in the house that she was at, even though she
Twice.
opened the door. Yeah, twice because I went back. They charged me with 2 grand thefts for things that I took out of the safe. And they also charged me with a burglary of conveyance because I went in the truck too before I went into the house, which I didn't get anything out of the truck, but just because I had went in it. And um, so I had all those charges, right? You know, I ended up with like 8 or 9 felonies at this point. And and I had never done any jail time, any prison time, never been on probation, but I'd been arrested a lot. I'd been arrested many times, but like I told you, they just kept slapping me on the wrist, throwing it away, throwing it away, throwing it away. Well, finally, this time they were offering me 20 years,
Mm.
and it stayed like that for over a year. I stayed in the county jail. I couldn't bond out because I was already out on bond for possession of cocaine, so they had revoked my bond. Um, and you know, I was stuck, and I was in this jail for 14 months, sitting at 20-year offers and never dropping below it. Had a couple different paid attorneys. Like it was just nothing. So finally, what the state agreed to was a 10-year cap. You know, you can plea out in front of the judge with a 10-year cap. The most they can give you is 10 years, but he can give you up to 10 years, or he can give you, anything in between. Well, I had scored out to like 52.6 months if you went by like the scoring guidelines based on the point system. And that's what the judge ended up giving me. So I pled out in front of the judge. I'll never forget because I was trying to use like, oh, well, I was at college. I went to college. I played professional baseball, and this guy was like, and it was crazy because even like, I told my attorneys, and this is the other part of the privilege and how like deeply ingrained like white supremacy and stuff was in my head without knowing at the time, is that I'm not like those people. I'm not like the people that are just out there selling drugs on the corner every day. Like I went to college, I played professional baseball, and they're like, you know what a lot of people would do? They would kill to have the opportunities that you've had, only for you to just think that you're entitled to piss it away. So like I didn't realize it then, but when I look back at my life, I realized, with the education that I have now, that, like I
You
was
amazing.
just, yeah, amazed at like the type of person that I was, though, like, so, and still have, the capacity to be that because I recognize, how far I've come with the work that I've done. But like, so that judge ended up telling me, he goes, I don't care, he flat out said that. He goes, I'm in this courtroom every single day with people who suffer from mental health and substance abuse. Like he goes, and people would kill to have the opportunities that you have, and you keep getting a slap on the wrist. Like you keep thinking that you can just keep doing this and there's no consequences to your actions. And he goes, well, I'm convinced that a person with your charges right now and the things that you've done need to see the inside of a prison. And he did. He gave me the minimum of what I scored out to, 52.6 months, and he gave me a year house arrest. And that was the first time I went to prison. And I wish I could say that I got it then, but I didn't. Prison wasn't that crazy for me the first time I went, but I ended up going back. So I did those 5 years, kind of got it together, but I was still not together. Like I didn't do any inside work on me in prison. You know, I played basketball, got caught up in playing basketball, softball, and I didn't even read a whole lot my first time. But I felt like because I did so much time in a county jail that I probably did like maybe 2 years in actual prison at that point. And 2 years to a lot is a lot to some people, and it felt like it was to me at that time. But then when I went back to prison the second time, I realized that like, okay, when I did 7 years the second time, so I got out the first time of prison. Um, I didn't really get caught up in any of the subculture, prison, gang culture, anything like that. Kind of just stayed in my lane, did my time, went home. But when I came home, I still had a year house arrest, and I did that so well that they terminated it early, right? Well, at that time, I'd gotten married. I got really heavy in the church. I went to seminary school, became a youth pastor. I met someone that was, but it was a lot of like Christian nationalism. You know what I mean? It was really right wing conservatism, Christianity, like very fundamentalist, orthodox type of faith belief system. And that was just as toxic as all the other stuff for me. It just went from one extreme to another, right? So I started dating this girl. She gets pregnant, and I think, okay, well, the Christian thing for me to do is I need to marry her, right? But we barely knew each other. We had been dating only a couple months. Like it wasn't an intentional pregnancy per se, but like I did all that, but I still wasn't well. Like I hadn't done any work, I hadn't done any therapy, any inside work, anything like that. And I'd been clean though at this point for a couple of years from that lifestyle, from using any drugs or drinking. She never knew me in any of that. And then finally, at like 9 months pregnant, she was 9 months pregnant. I had found out that she had slept with her ex right around the same time as me, and me being the man child that I was and not knowing how to process anything or emotionally, regulate anything, that I used that as an excuse to go drink. And then when I drank, I went right back down that road, and I went there fast in that cycle. And it took me about a week to spiral. But in that week's time, after being out of prison for like 2 years, clean for 2 years, in that week's time, I lost everything. I had a good job out of prison. I was making, roughly almost $8,000 to $10,000 a month. Bring home. I was actually working in the treatment industry, helping people with treatment, but even that was a whole nother scam and a whole nother conversation. But and I ended up losing all that. Well, because I had a record, I had everything we had was basically in her name. Even though I was paying for everything at the time, the place was in her name because we lived in an HOA, and I couldn't be on the lease. So when I had relapsed and she's 9 months pregnant, she's like, "You got to go," which is understanding. She needed healthy boundaries. Like I was now a threat to like, her safety, or, the safety of the child and everything like that. So like she wanted me to not come home. Well, at this time now I'm kind of living in my truck and on the streets again. And my dad's let me go to their house to shower and eat and do stuff like that. But me and my stepmom are not that close. Hold on a sec. So I'm going in and out of my parents' house. And at this point, now we had some, joint bank accounts and stuff like that, money, and I had spent all the money, went through everything, and then she started to like cut me off, like freeze the other stuff, because I was just so out of control. Well, now I had no access to funds, right? So now all my bank cards, nothing was working, right? And so my dad's like, "Okay, you can go there, just don't be there when your mom gets home." Well, I went to the house, and one day as I'm leaving, my mom was coming in, and she saw me, and it was like World War III. Anyways, I get charged. She calls the cops. I get charged with a burglary at my parents' house. Now, I'd been out of prison for almost 2 years, but I went to prison on a burglary charge. So in Florida, they can do what's called a Williams rule or whatever, and they can PRR you, which is Prison Release Reoffender Act. That if you get arrested on the same charges that you'd went to prison on before in less than 3 years, then it's a minimum mandatory of 15 years, and you got to do day for day, every day, no game time. So they charged me with a burglary at my parents' house. My dad's like, "Well, just stay in jail, like sober up, and this will go away. Like, we're not gonna press this any further." But it doesn't work that way, right? So like, I stayed in jail for roughly 6 months. They did depositions with my mom and my dad. Now my dad was basically saying I had permission to be there. Um, obviously we didn't want him using drugs, but I think he needs help. He doesn't need prison, right? So the state's like, give us depositions and we'll get him rehabilitation. Well, my mom gets depositions, said that my dad's an enabler. He always covers up for me. That I need, like I need to get it together. Da 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 da. Well, the state used that and told her, well, we're gonna, we're gonna offer him help, but the state didn't. They came at me with 15 years. So the offer was 15 years for now for a burglary at my parents' house, right? After I'd just been out of prison for all these other charges, and so I was like, "There's no way. I'm not taking 15 years." So finally, I told my dad. I was like, "Look, they're talking about 15 years." He's like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so he bonds me out, right? I had a bond the whole time, but they wanted me to stay in because they were worried about me coming right back out and getting right caught back up in the BS. So 15 years. When he heard that, he bonds me out, and then so we're fighting from the streets now. But the state's not wanting to go away. What the state said is that, they even signed the paperwork to drop the charges. They wanted everything to go away. And the state said, no, you're not the victim. You're our star witness. He didn't commit a crime against you. He committed a crime against the state of Florida. And they wouldn't make the charges go away. And I fought and I fought and fought. So finally got to the point where it's like either you go to trial or you take a plea deal. They dropped it to 7 years. And I really wanted to go to trial because my dad said I could be there. I had a strong case, but my mom was also said, in depositions that he couldn't be there and that my dad's just covering for me, enabling me, that she had revoked permission for me to be there. And anyway, so they end up coming at me with 7 years, and I'm like, forget it. Like I was wrong. I was high again. I was messing up. Whatever. I took the 7 years,
So
and I went.
let me ask you a quick question.
Uh
So
huh.
I always go into the psychological part of when people get time, and I
Hmm.
didn't do it the first time, but I'm gonna do it now. What
Yeah.
do you feel when you got that 7 years?
Yeah. This time was way different. Like one, I the anxiety was obviously there, but I kind of knew what to expect, right? Like mentally, I felt like I did because I'd went, but there's obviously like we just the idea of going to prison is super fearful, being away from society, family, loved ones. I was in a relationship at the time, even when I signed that 7 years, like so like I knew like the consequences behind it, the gravity behind it, but um you feel like your life is just it's over with, right? Like it's like there's like no help, no hope. You just it feels so dark, like and then thinking about having as many felonies as I have, and like what are you going to do after this and everything. So um, when I signed that deal again, like I couldn't believe that my life had went from professional baseball, college professional baseball, to now going to prison for the second time, right? Like it was a travesty. Like it was devastating, right? Like um to the point where like mentally like and like I just didn't want to live anymore, right? It was like, how am I going to get through this time? And what the hell did I do with my life, right? Like nobody wanted, you don't want to keep looking and face all that, the face the reality of like these are the consequences to the actions that I did. But I also felt like I was at the time I felt like victimized by the system a little bit too. The fact that I was getting 7 years for a burglary at my parents' house, but then, you know, which is crazy, and we'll talk more about it. But like that's when I was in prison, I realized that a lot of people got a lot more time for a lot less, or doing things like had I been a poor black person in our community with the amount of charges that I had, I would have never seen daylight, right? And that's what kind of happened to me too while in prison. The second time I got caught up in um, a lot of the subculture of, the drugs and the phones and the cigarettes and everything, in prison, and even the gang culture, heavily involved in the gang culture. But I met a man in prison by the name of Rashawn Clark. And Rashawn and I were from the same community. And, Rashawn was obviously, he was a black guy. He was Muslim. I was a white Christian. And, he got sentenced to prison at the age of 16 for 20 years for one felony, right? I, on the other hand, had 14 felonies, had been prison and home twice before he got to come home once. And I remember we had this conversation where I was like, well, these are the consequences to our actions. We can't be the victim. Stop being the victim. We made the choices. We got to do the time. He said, that's easy for you to say. You got 14 felonies and you'll be to prison and back home twice before I get to go home once. I was a juvenile. And the Department of Juvenile Justice had recommended that he get a rehabilitation program. They didn't even think that he warranted prison. Like, they felt like, okay, we can save his life, right? That he was redeemable. So what he told me, he's like, so when the judge saw you, he saw you as the All-American boy. He saw you as the college graduate, professional baseball player who just lost his way, got addicted to drugs, had some mental health issues, had some childhood trauma, and ultimately lost his way. And the judge could almost relate to you. He's like, the judge could see like his son, see you as his son. He said, but me, when that judge sentenced me, he saw me as another black kid in the system. He saw me as, a thug, a savage, a criminal, a predator, that I'm inherently criminal and violent. Like, that's what he thought when he saw me. And he didn't see my life as being salvageable and redeemable. And it was the first time I ever looked at that conversation in that light. Right. And I wish I could say that I completely got it then, but you got to think too, when I was in prison at this time, it started to be the height of the Black Lives Matters movement, with the George Floyd protests, and also when Trump, and that whole culmination. So like, I had did 7 years in prison, had never joined a gang, right? But I felt so compelled at the height of the Black Lives Matters movement and Trump, because of the politics, to literally join a white supremacist organization. And not in my head because I thought that I was racist or that I hated black people. It was that I thought that white people were under attack, right? Like, I was so lost in the sauce. Like, I literally thought that we were tolerant of every group except white people, that if you were a white, straight, Christian, conservative male, that you were under attack, and that, the country was out to get you, and that you were the problem for everything. They were blaming us for slavery. They were blaming us for, every problem that you see in every community. And I felt so offended, right? But I was so uneducated. And I feel like Trump emboldened a lot of people in that, like, that we also saw him as like anti-establishment. He's going to come drain the swamp, as they say, and clean everything up. And so like, when all that happened, to the point where I joined a white supremacist organization, and what we would say is that, oh, well, you can have black pride and brown pride, but if we have white pride, then we're racist, right? Like, and I would say all these things and not recognizing how ignorant and uneducated I was, that, the very idea of white pride is rooted in the politics of white supremacy. It was rooted in the oppression of other people. Like, the whole idea of even whiteness was created to oppress people, right? It was created to divide. And, like, because back then,
Create
Irish people,
classes.
yeah, well, it created a caste system. Yep, it created a caste system with race, because
Yes.
what it did is, back then, Irish people and Italian people didn't identify as white. You always identified as your nation of origin. Yeah.
Then eventually they could amalgamate into white
Yep.
society.
Yeah. And once I started to learn all this, and the real history and the origins, my perspective changed, and I was like, wow, this whole time I had it wrong, right? But at that time, like, I was so emboldened by Trump that, like, I joined. I felt compelled. Like, we had to fight for white people because we were under attack, And I feel like that's what led to the January 6th thing, like the people that went to the Capitol building, and and the movement that you see with MAGA is that people are so uneducated and so self-centered that they don't want to take the time to learn the real history about what we've done to marginalized groups.
Question.
Hmm.
When what did your aha moment come in, kick in after
So when I was in
you
prison, I had that conversation with Rashawn,
mm-hmm.
and then he told me to read The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age
After
of
the book,
Colorblindness by
Michelle Alexander.
Michelle Alexander. And that book is what opened my eyes. That's where my aha moment came. It was like a burning bush moment for me. And now I couldn't get that book in prison. So it wasn't until I got home, because they didn't allow that book in prison.
Mm.
But when I got home, this is what I read. This is what changed my perspective. Was that during the Civil Rights Movement, 1964, the Civil Rights Act, 1965, the Voting Rights Act, that during Jim Crow segregation, Black people faced second-class citizenship, right? They faced barriers to education, barriers to voting, barriers to housing, and all based on, the discrimination of the color of their skin, of race, right? Well, supposedly we passed the 64 Civil Rights Act and 65 Voting Rights Act, says that we can no longer discriminate based on race. Black people no longer had to pass literacy exams and pay a poll tax to vote. Now, according to white people, racism in America ended.
It's over.
This is the point where it ended, right? But then this is the number that I saw that changed my perspective, was that, especially being in prison myself, was that from 1970 to, the height of mass incarceration in like 2010, 2012, in that area,
Prisons got swamped.
700% increase in the prison population, from 300,000 inmates in 1970 to as high as 2.1 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I read this stat: 1 in 3 black males carry convicted felon label. I think that number is like 1 in 4 now. 1 in 3 black males, 1 in 6 Hispanic males, 1 in 17 white males. So I had to ask myself this question: either black people are inherently criminal or evil, or there's something much bigger at play that's targeting black people and oppressing them systematically, and systemically. And that's where, and I had met enough black people in my life to realize that, like, okay, like, black people aren't inherently evil. Like, and that's why I say, like, my racism was never rooted in thinking that I hated black people, although there was a lot of anti-blackness, propaganda that I had bought into, because I would tell, black people, just stop being the victim, right? Accept accountability for your actions. It's the fatherless homes, all the propaganda,
All the rhetoric.
all the rhetoric that we are taught, white on or black on black crime. Why don't we ever say white on white crime? The language that we use and the words that we use when we're talking about the black community it's just what I was conditioned to believe. Just comply. If black people would just comply or learn to be respectable. I think you're seeing it a lot now with you're seeing it manifested with Shadur Sanders with the whole draft, and they said that he's not humble enough. Like, God forbid a black person is confident in who they are and exhibits that, the treatment that they get, as opposed to when a white person is like that, they're like, yeah, he's a leader and he's for his team, or you know what I mean? Like, but so, and that's the stuff that I had been conditioned for so many years to believe in. So when I'm starting to read the data and starting to study real history, I'm like, holy crap, the light bulb went off. Yeah. And I was like, you know what, I got it. And I had no problem, because I felt like I always wanted to be a good person. I always wanted to seek truth and justice. So, like, even to the point of when I joined a white supremacist organization, like I said, it wasn't because I felt like I hated black people or any marginalized group. It was just because I felt like, oh, I was being pro my people. Yeah, like I'm elevating my people and sticking up for us too. Like, but and going back to the white pride thing. So white pride was founded in oppressing other people, right? Particularly the black community. Groups like the KKK, they've showed up in MAGA now, the Confederacy reincarnated, and all this stuff. But, like, if you look at black pride and brown pride, it was founded in surviving that oppression.
And fighting against
it, keeping culture, stopping your cultural erasure and identity of being completely erased, which you see it happening right now. The White House is trying to erase,
it's pulling stuff out of the African American Museum.
Yeah, out of the museum, like big time events that transpired, because it's saying it's showing too much of America's flaws. Like, and it once again, and what I recognize now is that this society and this system was always designed to benefit me. It was I was the center of the narrative, and I realized that when I was getting in trouble, it was about me. I'm not like those people, like
Mhm.
the system was designed to protect me, it was designed to benefit me. And I realized that when I got caught up in that system, I was collateral damage in a system that was not designed to target me. I wasn't supposed to be in that system,
Nah.
right? I had to work really hard to get in that system. Like I had to go above and beyond and being a piece of crap and doing the things that I did. Whereas somebody like Rashawn made one mistake at the age of 16. He's still in prison.
Well,
17 and a half years now.
I
Yeah.
like to say what it gave you was
Hmm.
a different frame of mind.
Yeah.
Your mind changed. So before we go, because I do gotta cut it short,
Yeah.
but I want to ask you, tell a little bit about all the stuff that you have done, because you have done a lot of work since you've been home,
Hmm.
and then I want a word of wisdom.
Okay. So, yeah, since I've been home now, we are actively working with legislators in Florida, which Florida's a very hard state to get things passed. We did just get a bill to introduce this legislative session that's supposed to help with rights restoration for convicted felons. I've worked with Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, which is founded by Desmond Meade. They help to get voting rights restored for Floridians, which is huge. But even then, Republicans kind of moved the goalpost on that to where they said you got to be completely done with all of your probation, all your fines paid. So somebody like me, I'm still on probation. I can't vote yet, still in my state, but I'm fighting for felons to be able to. And the other thing too, with Florida Rights Restoration Coalition is that if you had the fines and stuff that you couldn't pay, they were paying them for felons so they can get their voting rights restored. I've been working with State Representative Dottie Joseph out of Miami. She's amazing. She's Haitian American. She's been fighting, and it's really hard in Florida, uh, to for representation, right? Like because it's the conservative national, Christian nationalism, the MAGA, all that's so deeply entrenched in this state. So like kudos to her for standing up and standing out in a state to where that it's very hard. And she's, helped to work with me to get some of these bills introduced and stuff like that. And um, so we've been doing that. I've also gone to other states. I went out to Colorado, met with them. They have a very holistic approach to public defense to look at some of the root causes of why people commit crime and use that as mitigating factors to like not give them the book if you can, like trying to help people. So yeah, a lot of traveling, public speaking, and a platform now on social media. We've been educating people and getting people to learn, especially in the white community, the the history of racism in this country and systemic racism.
Okay, and give me a word of wisdom.
Ooh, I don't even know what. Um, I would have to really think about that. Mm,
Somebody in prison, out prison, anything.
yeah,
Just something that will inspire somebody,
I would
especially with
definitely.
all that you've been through.
Yeah, definitely don't lose hope. One thing I tell people, and I think I learned this about my experience in prison, is that adversity doesn't build character, it exposes character. So be, you know, one thing my dad used to always tell me is that integrity is doing the right thing when no one's looking. And, you know, try to be a high character person, and even when it feels like everybody is like everybody, even when truth and justice feels like you feel like you're the only one striving for it. Like in my community, there's so many people that are just misinformed, disinformed, misguided, that like sometimes I can almost feel like that I'm the one that's wrong. Like that, or like the stuff that I know that I've learned, that this is real history, that like that like you feel like you're going up up creek without a paddle.
It's an uphill
You know,
battle.
it's an uphill battle. It really is, and then people get afraid to speak. So I would tell people definitely to speak out no matter what, right? Like no matter what you feel like the consequences are, because there is so much retaliation. We're seeing judges getting arrested now. We're seeing people that are afraid of the consequences and retaliation. So like, continue to speak out and stand up for what you believe in, no matter what, even if you're the only person, because it's not always easy, but it's definitely been worth it for sure. And I've lost a lot because of this fight. I've lost a marriage, I've lost, financial, careers, I've lost things because I refuse to compromise, and I
You
won't.
you'll get
Yeah.
it all back
Because
because
we've gained
you're
so much
doing
more.
you're
Yeah.
doing right. One, I appreciate you for being who you are and overcoming the challenges you have had to come from within side.
Hmm.
Because what had happened, you had to only do what most people are scared to do, and that's educate themselves.
Educate yourself.
And when
Yep.
you did so, this is how God works.
Yeah.
It creates a fighter, a person who really has something now to give back, because you've also been in all these different different platforms, white
Hmm.
nationalists, white Christian nationalists, and
Hmm.
now you have the ammunition to go back and share information.
Yeah.
Whether they accept it or not, they'll listen to it. And
Hmm.
then the root of it raise the plant later on.
Yeah.
But keep doing what you're doing, man. I
Thank you.
appreciate you. And hey, I will send this to you. And
Definitely. I appreciate it.
I'm gonna send you my book too.
Okay. Yeah. Do that. And yeah, definitely send me, we'll post clips of this stuff too as well. So
Look, hey,
appreciate it.
appreciate you being who you are.
Yeah. Much love to you, brother. Thank you.
Blessings. Love you,
Yeah.
man.
Take care. Love you too, bro. Take care.
Blessings. Oh, my name is Carlos Walker. This is Forward Progress, and this is Danny Collins or Daniel Collins.
Yeah.
Blessings.
Daniel, it don't matter.